What is a dark ride? Dark rides are amusement devices that possess three core characteristics: a narrative arc, physical movement through a space, and a sense of reality or immersion. This definition excludes attractions that are recognizably not dark rides. Examples include film experiences, including motion simulators, which do not move through space, museum exhibits, which lack a sense of reality or immersion, and roller coasters, which lack a narrative arc. As we will see, these are not hard exclusions, but rather can be amended to fill the three characteristics rather easily, making them a true dark ride. Though the dark ride in its modern conception did not arise until the late 19th century, that first true dark ride was in no ways a historical anomaly. Its narrative roots can be seen as far back as the Paleolithic Chauvet cave paintings in France. Werner Herzog, in his Cave of Forgotten Dreams, describes a new grammar of imagery present in the paintings, suggesting a narrative, quote, on something we do not see. Thus, very early in human history, we see the intersection of space and narrative. Further evidence of spatially aware narratives comes from Zonen's examinations of oral storytelling. He contends that the earliest works of oral storytelling reveal an understanding of space beyond simply the setting in which a narrative takes place, suggesting that spatial structures drove how verbal continuums were presented in these tales. The element of immersion begins to form with the understanding and use of perspective in art and architecture. Euclid is considered to have pioneered the mathematical basis for perspective in his Optics, while Ptolemy is cited as presenting the first analysis of binocular vision 400 years later. Perspective would not be applied to art and architecture until the early Renaissance. The St. Francis fresco cycle in Assisi is the earliest known example of integrating together narrative, spatial progression, and immersion. The 28 panels presented the life of St. Francis, legible by following a path through the chapel, but also used various techniques of forced perspective. The effect was so realistic that viewers would often reach out and touch the walls, expecting them to recede into space. Immersion was further fleshed out in the Romantic era, particularly in studies of the sublime. Nature was seen as an extra-sensory experience, and naturalist landscape designers sought to recreate the power and mystery of nature in their work. William Kent theorized the concept of concealment of bounds, where limited view lines and hidden features could be used to create a spatial progression of experience and block sights that would break the intended emotional narrative. It was in the industrial era, however, that the concept of a dark ride would begin to take its form. Commodity culture, stemming from the effects of new methods of production, privatized public entertainment and leisure by molding them into capitalist packages. This can be seen in the English pleasure gardens, which collected various activities and placed them within a space accessible by a fee. Theming in its modern conception was first used in the World's Fairs of the late 1800s to promote the industrial order, such as with the exhibits of the Crystal Palace. And new production technologies redefined the relationship between man and machine and created a fashion with the pre- and non-industrial order. A product of the industrial era, Coney Island and its imitators were the breeding grounds for innovation and ingenuity in the amusement industry. It was in these urban leisure hubs that the golden age of the American amusement park occurred, where classes of urban citizens with new expendable income looked for new venues of entertainment. Now come join us as we ride through the history of the dark ride. The first modern dark ride opened in 1887 in Atlantic Beach, New Jersey. An early roller coaster, the Scenic Railway was designed by Lamarcus Thompson with the help of James Griffiths and John Miller. Despite its long outdoor roller coaster sections, the ride used dark tunnels filled with special effects to tell short narrative vignettes complete with sound and lighting effects. The ride set an early precedent for combining scenery design and technologies used in cinema with the dark ride. It was in a similar environment that the Old Mill Flume ride would develop a few years later in 1891. Designed by George W. Schofield for Sea Lion Park, the ride was themed to a haunted Pennsylvania grist mill. Guests rode in boats that floated slowly through a shallow canal, passing through tunnels with scenes intended to startle riders. These dark sections made the ride and its successors popular among young couples looking for romantic seclusion, leading ride vendors to eventually retheme them into the now quintessential Tunnels of Love. 1901's Pan American Exposition in Buffalo contained the first example of a blockbuster-style dark ride, A Trip to the Moon. Designed by Frederick Thompson, no relation to Lamarcus, the attraction simulated a trip to the moon via airship, complete with an aerial flight over Niagara Falls and through an electrical storm, a walkthrough of moon grottos complete with dancing dwarves, and an exit back to the fair through a mechanical moon calf. The ride would later become the flagship of Luna Park in Coney Island upon its opening in 1903. The following decade saw the amusement industry spread, with concepts pioneered at Coney Island filtering down to local industries across the country. The pretzel ride provided a frugal dark ride option in smaller local parks. Constructed by Leon Cassidy and Marvin Rempfer for their own Tumbling Dam amusement park in New Jersey in 1928, the ride used a single electrified rail to create a dry old mill style attraction, as a water-based old mill was too expensive. Upon the ride's success, Cassidy and Rempfer would patent the track format and construct between 1,200 and 1,500 before the company ceased production in 1979. The opening of Disneyland in 1955 was a turning point for the amusement park, integrating corporate paternalism with a nostalgia for futurism and exoticism. The damage to America's amusement parks from the Depression and the proliferation of television left them viewed as dirty, unsafe, and misaligned with the iconography of the new suburban middle class. Disneyland created a securitized, clean space in which families could enjoy the Disney product they had previously consumed via television. Where previously dark rides only held loose narratives, Disney's dark rides told stories. Focusing on the fundamental storytelling techniques of medieval fairy tales, these rides not only presented a narrative but embodied Disneyland's function as a paternal social device, reinforcing contemporary social roles and themes of paternalism. The 1964 New York World's Fair was not an official fair as sanctioned by the BIE, and to compensate for a lack of participating nations, coordinator Robert Moses called upon American corporations to host pavilions. Walt Disney shared a common vision of a paternal America with Moses, and Moses, impressed with Disney's impact on the country's cultural landscape, invited him to take a lead role in the fair's development. In addition to heavy involvement in fundraising and planning, the Disney Company designed 3 major dark rides for the fair: Ford's Magic Skyway, GE's Progress Land, and Pepsi's It's a Small World. These rides are notable because of their sponsorship, presenting a narrative steeped in ideology and slanted towards the sponsor's industries. In this way, the dark rides of the fair were used to blur the lines of entertainment and technology, progress and consumption, and state and industry. Faced with growing competition from Disneyland across town, Universal Studios expanded its tram tours to include fixed attractions, starting with a flash flood element in 1968. Universal capitalized on the disaster movie craze of the 70s by expanding these fixed elements to include a collapsing bridge, rock slide, runaway train, and later the extremely popular Jaws, King Kong, and earthquake scenes. This trend of action-oriented amusement attractions took the industry by storm, playing off broader societal fears of urban and international unrest and channeling them into alternative outlets. It is not a coincidence that Disney's first successful reaction to these action-oriented dark rides would come in its own movie park, MGM Studios. Intended to be the park's flagship ride, the Tower of Terror had to be physically dominating, thematically coherent with the park as a whole, and fantastically innovative. These demands were solved through a drop ride system, allowing the structure of the ride to rise 199 feet in the guise of an abandoned Hollywood hotel. The ride vehicles move between showrooms, cable lifts, horizontal passages, and accelerated drop chambers. The ride's unprecedented dedication to realism and detail made it a model for the 21st century dark ride, particularly in its elevation of the ride system from a means of narrative to an element of the narrative itself. CEO Michael Eisner declared the 1990s the Disney decade, and one of the company's major challenges was targeting the age compression of children increasingly trying to emulate teenagers. In conjunction with a brand-wide effort to capitalize on digital technology, Buzz Lightyear's Space Ranger spin at Disney's Magic Kingdom in Orlando was opened in 1998 as the first interactive shooting-style dark ride. The ride reused the track and systems of an older traditional dark ride, adding a twist to the ride's re-theme by adding an interactive digital component. This literal repurposing also paralleled the ride's metaphorical repurposing, in which the classical dark ride form was pushed to evolve to target the changing desires of park guests. Another product of Disney's technologies research of the 1990s, Pooh's Honey Hunt at Disneyland Tokyo used location position systems to create the first trackless dark ride. Sensors along the ride floor and vehicles relay information back to a central computer, which calculates paths for the cars to travel in real time. This allows the vehicles to seem to move on their own, crossing paths and passing each other in near misses. This technology allows riders to visit each of the ride scenes in different orders, creating a sense of spontaneity and opening up opportunities for non-linear narratives. After decades of proponents hailing virtual reality as the end to almost everything traditional, the development of lightweight mass-produced hardware like the Oculus Rift has opened the door for expanded uses of VR. Though virtual roller coasters have been frequently used in stationary motion simulators, VR Coaster is the first company to successfully incorporate VR into a physical roller coaster, providing a fantasy visual experience in coordination with the hills and turns of a real ride. By using mobile headsets, the company allows parks to repurpose their roller coasters into definition dark rides. Dark ride of today looks very similar to the dark ride of the late 1800s, and narrative, spatial progression, and immersion play key roles in VR Coaster just as much as in the old mill. The timelessness of these elements illustrates the deep historical footprints of their influences, stretching back to cave paintings and oral storytelling. Indeed, it could be argued that the appeal of the dark ride is that in many ways it is a form of physical storytelling, just as valid as art or literature in expressing narrative and meaning to the public. Whatever the form it may take as the amusement park evolves to meet guest demands, it is clear that the dark ride will play a fundamental role in its future.